Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the View from the Arch podcast. I'm Dhruv Patel alongside Himanshu Sahai, and together we're the co-founders of Arch Lending, the premier destination to borrow against your Bitcoin and crypto assets. And today we have a really exciting conversation with Ani Pai, partner at Dragonfly, one of the top crypto venture capital firms. Ani, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks guys. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming. So Ani, you have a somewhat unique story. Most people don't know about it, and you live in some interesting circles. Why don't you walk us through what parts of the world you have spent time in and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, no, like I said, thanks for having me. But yeah, I don't want to bore people too much, but the way I would kind of salami slice it is grew up in the Bay, got, I guess, very jaded with Silicon Valley early on, and then moved to the UK from undergrad. But while I was there, I think I had this like deep fascination with everything going on between bits and atoms, basically. And my foray into technology, I think, was much more in the deep tech sense, and then got super interested in Charter City. So I was at Pronomos for a bit, which was kind of the first venture capital fund investing in new cities, and same kind of venture fund that had made like the Seasetting Institute with Patrick Friedman. And then I sort of did some work in the AI and physical mineral space, and so kind of applying early AI, I think, to like mines and all of that. And around this time, I mean, even since when I was in high school, I was always curious about crypto itself, in part because like even growing up in the Bay, it was like very obvious that like the kind of giga big tech companies were very inside the Overton window, but also just contra what like most Americans thought about everything. And so that kind of led to my decision leaving. But crypto was sort of my way out, I think, in many ways. It was like a kind of cry and criticism against like everything that was going on. Because like what hope does like a normal person have against like Mark Zuckerberg, right? Or Sundar? Like how do you, like the only way to change things, right, in the kind of broad country sense is exit or voice. But what's my voice or your voice against Sergey Brin?
It's an economic voice now.
Correct. And so like the way that we solved it over, past 3 centuries, it's been like our ancestors took the Mayflower and just GTFO'd, right? And now it's like, what is the economic equivalent of that? Of course, it's like something in crypto, right? And whether you can go to South America, whether you go to Africa, you're still in the American hegemon, but crypto gives you a way out. And so I think that's like very inspiring, right? For people like us, obviously we're investing in this stuff, even people like you guys, I mean, helping subsidize and increase economic opportunity, right? It's very exciting.
So you had a foray into crypto before Dragonfly as well, with a mutual friend of ours, which is actually how we met. How did you decide to start that, and like what was your initial foray into crypto even before that?
Yeah, this part I think I was very lucky, but my first inclination toward Bitcoin, I was actually kind of a Bitcoin skeptic, I think, when I was like middle school or like early high school. But I was very lucky, I think, to have a lot of friends who were just best in the world at like deep or like pure math. And we would like take walks after school. And one of them was like, hey, have you seen like this EVM ETH thing? And so immediately I went home, took, I guess, like a bunch of the money I had at the time, not a lot, and made my first ETH transaction. And then I was hooked. It was probably the most magical experience I've had since using the iPhone, or like the first time I went into a Model S or something. And when I was in school, briefly, I interned at a crypto hedge fund, but we were just like, I mean, trying to take a long-term view of shitcoins, which we didn't realize at the time. But I think everyone should have somewhat of that like financial background. Not that like finance is that important or whatever, but it's helpful to like have sophistication around these topics.
Did you just sort of glad? Not that finance is that important?
No, I mean, no, in the sense.
Question that.
Yeah. Well, finance. I think people get what I mean. Of like, you don't need an MBA to succeed, right? I think we're very glad to live in a time where it's like, if it was all of us like 30 years ago, right, it'd be like, go to MIT Sloan, or like go to Stanford's Business School or HBS. But now it's just like, it's great that all these concepts have like pilfered through daily life, right? And we couldn't have the same conversation, I think, 5 years ago.
Yeah, and so like, from getting into crypto, how'd you think through that you wanted to be on the venture capital side as opposed to maybe building companies or operating at them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd also be kind of curious to ask you guys the same in the opposite case. But I got very lucky, I think. Like my honest take here is, I think had it not been for Dragonfly, I probably would have just been a smaller participant in the space. Like I don't think I would have gotten as deep. And that I think speaks volumes about my colleagues, but also it's like we're trying to do something unique in crypto, which is act as this bridge between the East and the West. And at the time that I was talking to people on the team, I didn't see that. Like it's a very weird oddity in crypto that many of the products are used in the West, or made in the West, I should say, and then used in the East. And like, where do you really find that market structure elsewhere in the
It's
world?
quite the opposite elsewhere, right? Like,
Correct.
we buy products from the East and use them in the West.
Correct.
Yeah.
So like we all know, we've all grown up in this time where products are made in China or Vietnam, or even in more contemporary times, India, and they're exporting deflation. But America has historically been the place where we're exporting inflation. And so these are countervailing forces that kind of interact. But crypto is the opposite, which is like very unique. And that stood out to me of like, what type of world is this now where it's like we are sitting in the bastion of like American ingenuity, Western thought. And this is a way to almost bolster American soft power abroad, right? Like stablecoins. I know we'll get there. But just the fact that we have something like stablecoins in a time when so many people are like decrying the dollar and they like want it to like go away. Obviously not Americans, but like you can see BRICS and everyone else, they're getting a bit upset. Stablecoins it's just like supercharging that, and it's like rocket fuel for networks.
Is that only because they're usually dollar denominated, or is there a different use case too?
Yeah, it's like something like 99.6% of stables are USD. That goes to show there's like people have this inordinate faith in the American financial system, right? And even for you guys, like you guys only offer USDC,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. What does that say, right?
And US
it's
dollars.
like, it reminds me, I know you both are obviously very big into cars, and like there was a thing with a Lamborghini a few years ago, right? Where it's like so many people were like, oh, I want like a manual Huracan or something. Do you know what I'm talking about?
They never made one.
No, it was Aventador. You know, they had like, they like made a manual version of a very popular Lambo, and like something like 14 people bought it. And that goes to show, like, everyone was like, oh, they're putting up a big game, right? And like, why don't you buy the car? In much the same way, you want bricks? Go buy, the digital rupee. No one puts their money where their mouth is. And that goes to show with the manual, right? Same thing. It's like, it's very easy to like talk, but no one is moving size in any of these currencies, especially in crypto. And so that kind of got, I think the big real surprise for us this year has been how many people have like gravitated or exist in the gravitational well of something like Ethena, right? With what they did with the basis trade. And we knew that the market would be big. We had no idea how big. And that's the exciting part about this job, I think, where you have like a secret about something and that secret just goes on to change the world, basically.
Do you feel like it's your job to educate people about the stuff you guys get excited about? Because you get excited about stuff a year or two before people get to know about it. How do you transfuse that excitement to other people?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, before I answer, I'm kind of curious about you guys. Like, how did you both try to do that? Because you guys were competing in somewhat of a commoditized.
So we actually met also because of investing, because we were both investing ourselves, and that's how we met. Although we had known each other for a while, and I had never pitched someone before. Like 100 companies that pitched me, which was quite an interesting thing, because it's my first startup as well, and yours too. And it was interesting being on the other side, but I also kind of approached it very differently coming as an investor into being a founder versus what I would have being like a serial entrepreneur. I think crypto for me was something that was always just in the periphery. I didn't approach it from a concept of like sovereign money. I think I approached it from a place that the smartest people I knew were all spending time on this, and that led me to spend more and more time on it, up to a point where it got so complicated I didn't fully understand it. And I was like, I need to spend more time understanding this because I'm going to be left behind. And I spent more and more time understanding it. We spent a lot of time together understanding specifically what we're doing. And then we realized that we're going up against all these big players, which have since died.
But at the time, they were like the biggest monsters in the room, right?
Yeah,
like,
but like the beautiful thing.
They had all this access. SBF was like on stage talking about them, right? It was like just... yeah, insanely scary.
The beautiful thing about crypto is everything is an open secret. I mean, as you know, we talk about like the inside workings of pretty much every company, which most people don't know about on a daily basis. And we were able to find out exactly how these companies are run and learned very quickly that what they're doing isn't sustainable. So our bet initially was pretty much, let's build a sustainable, secure, regulated lending business, and then we move on from there.
Yeah, I think it was like twofold, right? Like we had this initial thought of building a secure, transparent business around lending, and it's resonated with the market so far. And you can see how things have transpired over the last few years. And for us, also you pair that with the customer service that we're providing and really the product experience. I think one other piece about crypto is really the user experience is sort of hard, right? When you think about a lot of the other companies, it's very sort of scary to go and interact with many of these businesses where you're sending funds out into the
Yeah.
ether, things of that sort. And so, how can we build a company that has the similar usability that you've seen in quote unquote Web 2
Mhm.
and all these other companies and bring
Yeah.
that to this space? And so, that's
Yeah.
another ethos of ours as well.
No, I fully agree. It's like, not to go back to the car analogy, but like you sort of remember like how the early automobiles had characteristics that were like very similar to horses and stuff,
Mhm.
and it's very schemorphic, right? And then you can do crazy shit later, like obviously now we have electric cars and all of that, but crypto needs the same thing.
Yeah.
And we did the opposite everyone always makes this mistake. We like did exactly the wrong thing, which is we brought people and like dropped them 50 years in the future.
Yep.
With no infrastructure, right? And we're
Mhm.
expecting like grandmothers in Africa to like send $100, which might be a large percentage of their net worth, and there's no recourse.
The way
We were actually thinking about doing that for a long time, right? Which is now when you think about like 2017, 2018, like what a shit show. Like
I think
disaster.
those grandmothers in Africa will be able to do it, just not with the way current infrastructure is set up,
Correct.
right? Like they will still go use Western Union because that's what they understand. It's very simple. They can go to a shop, give them $100, and they'll do the work for them just based on address. Um, Wallet infrastructure is like getting better. It's not there, but I think as you hide away a lot of the infrastructure in the product itself and just make it a better customer experience, people will gravitate more. I think the car analogy is great. Early cars, first they would look like horse-drawn carriages, which had little like levers instead of steering wheels. Then people realized, oh, a steering wheel makes more sense because you can turn it. You had to take
I mean horsepower, right?
horsepower.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
and
like
still
so
have
many
that.
so many of the same mental models.
On an early car, you'd have to go, someone very strong would have to go like twist this thing on the front, and often you would break your arm doing that. Not exactly a trade-off you want to make to get from point A to point B. And that's similar to where we are today, where yeah, you have your wallet, but you might get drugged and you might have like a hack or whatever. But now we're getting to one more level of abstraction where that might not be the case. Or with us, for example, with most lending companies in DeFi, you can't talk to anyone, even in other like centralized lending companies. With us, just the fact that people can talk to us very quickly, like right there in the platform, just makes them like so much more comfortable.
Yeah, Nani, you probably experienced this as like a customer, just
Mhm.
in terms of our product experience and just the way we operate as a business. But certainly bringing together like private banking level service into this space.
Yeah, no, fully. I think the custody feature you guys also have is interesting because like there's that line that I often repeat. It's like a famous hedge fund line, which is like in America you have to retire twice. It's like the first time you make your money and the second time when you invest it to beat inflation. And no one in crypto wants to think about that, right? It's like the space is volatile enough that most of the people I know in crypto who just like completely crushed it, they have their money in like index funds.
Mhm.
Like they don't want to like re-ride the volatility again, right? Because it's like who knows? I buy like Floki Inu and that goes down 80%, right? It's like you don't even trust yourself to want to take those risks because you don't understand the sharp or like the kind of inherent uncertainty that lies underneath. But I think we have a very strong custody solution. People can just like stake it, do whatever. It's like in the future, it'll be like very NLP based.
Mhm.
It'll be natural language. And you kind of just define the parameters of what you want. It's safe. That's it. Right?
Mhm.
You just want to focus on what are the big things I need to get done today. The money kind of happens and then you can store it securely and not.
People don't think a lot about capital preservation in crypto.
Mhm.
They think about how much they want to make and how
Right.
much they can make. That's actually a really good segue into something that's quite top of mind for a lot of people today. I didn't quite think or realize, or would have expected rather, this many smart, intelligent, successful people to be into meme coins. What do you think about that?
Yeah, this is a question that we get back and forth from like all kind of shades and stripes of people, from like sovereign wealth funds to even normal people. They always want to know like what is the deal with meme
Mhm.
coins, right? I actually think that in a broader scope, it's like if you think about it from first principles, it makes perfect sense because like in every other aspect of the economy, we've shut out young people from having a say, right? And if you define a say as like having a meaningful stake in the outcome, it's like if you look at wages adjusted for how many shares of the S&P they can buy, it's like all-time lows. Like the amount of labor hours you have to work to accumulate 1 unit of capital, which is defined as like a share of the S&P 500, it's like gone up, hundreds of percent in the past few decades. And people are not dumb, right? Like everyone is just trying to expect that these 18-year-olds, 25-year-olds even, just like will lie down and just accept this. But you kind of realize in the background, it's like New York skyline, basically the same. The roads suck. The subways are dangerous. All your friends are anxious. Everyone's on SSRIs. How do you like get out of this just abyss, right? The only way out is financial freedom. And so on one hand, you can kind of see this in like the rise of all the Andrew Tate stuff, right? That's like on one end where he's I think speaking to what a lot of like young males feel, which is just like shut out of the ecosystem. On the other hand, you have just like this enormous wave of like drug use, which obviously led, I think, to a lot of the fentanyl stuff. All of that is because I think largely it is this relationship between capital and labor that people are not understanding properly. And so meme coins, now you're wondering, how do meme coins relate to this? Well, meme coins give people a sense of a way out where it's like, hey, I understand culture. I have no actual, a lot of people, it's like, what skills do I have at 18, right? Like, can I be instrumental at building
And if I
this
did have
excellence?
skills, I wouldn't be able to make money out of
Right.
skills.
So it's like, you need to make money because every year that you wait, you are losing your bargaining power of labor versus capital. We're not going back to a world where we use less technology, right? So you can only believe that we are going to eradicate labor more and more as kind of an assumption. So they know that, and they're like, okay, how do I like compete in this economy? Well, I understand culture, right? Like look at someone like Alex Cooper, right, from Call Her Daddy. It's like she went from like nothing to now being the star that people decries, like kind of deciding the Kamala and Trump nomination, right, and how young people view her. But just the fact that that's possible, can you imagine that like 20 years ago? No.
Yeah.
So now culture is dynamic, it's evolving. Young people like have more of a say now than ever before with TikTok and all these things. But now you can make money on it. And so that itself, like fast forward, and this is the part that we talk a lot about internally. It's like, what skills do even us have in 50 years, right? Labor will effectively be 0% of the S&P, I think. The amount of effort required is probably not worth the ability to invest capital repeatedly, right? And so AI agents are almost a form of capital itself. So believing that, really the only thing we can do as a species is invent culture, experience, like make new things happen and experience the world, right? And if you believe in that case, meme coins, I think, are the first evolution of this. NFTs, all these things are getting at a deeper problem, which is like, maybe our role here in 50 years is to simply experience what's going on.
Interesting.
I know no one's expecting that from like a simple meme coin thing, right? But I remember,
No, it actually goes very well into like the
NFTs,
AI,
right? It was the same thing
Also,
with CryptoKitties. Yeah.
like AI advancement, like with AI advancement getting to a stage where most basic human functions and like lower level jobs are like just done. It leads us to a place where like your job isn't to do a job; it's probably just to experience life.
Yeah. And where I went to university, I think this was pretty instrumental in my thinking. But Nick Land, who kind of coined the EAC movement, right, effective accelerationism, he made the term accelerationism. He was teaching at our philosophy department. I was like one of the few undergrads to work at the nonprofit that he made. And I remember him saying that in a lot of his thinking, which everyone should read, he was like, AI, again, this idea is very crazy, but like the more I live, the more I'm like, oh, maybe he had something going on, because he was like writing about this in 1992. He was like, AI has come from the future and made these systems to kind of recreate itself. And you look at like the growth of just pure capitalism, right? And like crypto is the lodestar of that. It's like, wow, if we don't like resolve these solutions soon, right, with kind of decentralized AI and all those things and making these things apparent. It was like, did you guys see like Mark Andreessen's interview on Joe Rogan?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where he was like, literally they told him like, no more AI companies. And we can like very quickly enter this kind of totalitarian one world government if we're not careful. And crypto is the only way out, honestly. So it's like every year kind of in this business, you're like, oh, these are like real problems that are not just in science books or like fiction books or whatever. Like this is happening in real time of like people want to clamp down on freedom. Like it's like very apparent. And we need like grassroots to fight back. Exit versus voice.
Yeah. Wanted to string together a few things that you touched on and question for you here. How do you think about all of this with respect to being a crypto investor? So you have meme coins that are a possibility to invest in. You also invest in companies, many of whom have tokens. And there it's liquid. You always have the opportunity to either sell or continue holding. So that job seems more like a hedge fund. How do you look at your sort of role there in terms of the landscape of things you invest in and how long you hold things?
Yeah. Well, like, if I'm being frank, like if it was just up to us, we'd want to hold like forever, right? Like if you look at like how the best investments ever have done, it would have been a mistake like Sequoia to sell. I think they did right after the IPO.
Of
Terrible of Apple.
Okay.
Yeah, and they got the idea right, but I think it was also Sequoia who said they learned from this, and a few years ago they launched like a public markets fund to sort of capture a lot of the value post the investment, right? Because you look at things like Airbnb or Facebook, right? Like I don't know about you guys, I distinctly remember where I was when Facebook IPO'd. Everyone was like, "This is going to zero." Complete opposite happened, right? Just kept going, and still will keep going. So it's like in our case, I think a lot of people have this weird belief about kind of VCs in general in crypto, where it's like they just want to dump immediately. But because of protections that we have, things with the SEC being an RIA, you're actually like, even if you don't want to, forced to hold, which actually for a lot of people is probably the better outcome, because if they sold too early, you miss most of the gain, right? So I think about things like we invested in AVAX near kind of very early on. Hasib, I think, led both of those deals back in 2018 or around that time. And it's like, if we had sold too early, you would have missed like all this exciting growth that's happened in both of them, right? Near doing everything in the decentralized AI space, AVAX just sort of like crushing it across all levels, like from RWA, as you guys might know, they have such an excellent RWA team, and then gaming, and then all these things, right? It's like this fantastic wellspring, I think, that they made 7 years later, right?
We're actually tokenizing our debt facility. It's going to be on AVAX.
Yeah. Who would have known?
So
That was not part of the underwriting process, I can tell you back then, but like you have to bet on great teams, on a fantastic product that in crypto is very much just like marriage between technology and culture and BD, which in that case is certainly part of the product, right? The fact that you guys are like building on AVAX. And then the market. It's like, what market are they trying to go after, right? How does the market comp? Or like how does retail or institutional investors comp that side of the market? And so we're trying to go after like the sort of civilizational problems in crypto that like will actually lead to this like huge pot of gold at the end.
How do you marry that thinking with the cyclicality of crypto markets, which is at this point every 2 to 3 years?
Well, it's good that we just want to hold, right, for a long time. I mean, that's also the hard part about the business. I think Charlie Munger had that line, which is the hard part of investing is not writing the check, it's in the waiting. And so the unfortunate part, I think, about a lot of venture capital is that you have to invest. So you might be in a period of 18 months, let's say, whatever, right? It'd be sort of hard to just like not make investments for 18 months. And that's like because the model is like time oriented, right? The denominator is IRR, which of course is a time component in the equation. But I think we're lucky to be in a space where just like every few months there's like new shots at bat, right? You can completely miss the meme coin stuff and then make a ton of money off decentralized AI or DePIN or infrastructure, right? Like the market has in crypto gives you just so many, I think, so much low hanging fruit. The harder problem is not that. I think it's people should just remember that it's an infinite game. And I think when people like shit on VCs, it's not because of the model. It's just because there's just a lot of terrible venture capital. And it's not about the model. It's not about low float, high FTV. It's just like, you want to make sure you're doing business with like people with high integrity. And like the people don't give enough thought to doing that, I think.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it seems like you touched on it a little, but what are and you mentioned DePIN, decentralized AI, what are the sort of broad areas that you're excited to invest in right now?
Yeah, I mean, starting from the beginning, I think like we have accidentally ended up, I think, being one of the most prominent stablecoin investors. Like we always knew it'd be big, but like, we've done such things. We've done a lot more recently that I can't really talk about, but we did, like I said, Ethena way back in the day, commoditizing the basis trade. We did Agora about a year ago, which, obviously it's Nick Van Eck in partnership with Van Eck, but that idea is interesting of like, trying to take down Tether by giving some of the yield that they get from stables back to the businesses. And we've been spending a lot of time looking at rails for these things. So like, can we use like crypto rails for SMEs and bigger businesses instead of using like dilapidated wire transfers. So more on that soon. Another one there that I really like is this company called Zarpay that's rolling up what they call in South America and Pakistan and all these places. Well, the Spanish version of this is called Cuevas. So it's like when you go to Argentina and you're trying to exchange cash for crypto, you have these things like kiosks. And so you find these around Africa where it's like, in basically every country in Africa, you can use telco points, so like data points for cash. And so you can go to these kiosks and exchange that for stables and then bring people on chain. And like I find like that model is you can roll up basically all the Cuevas together in a certain area and create this like bargaining power that they might otherwise have. But imagine you do that, get all that money on chain, collect the yield and give that back to people, right? It's like just a much better way, I think, of doing business than like people around Jalalabad are used to, right? It's like, what hope do they have? Well, now it's like you can actually be not a union, but like you actually have much more of a say in what's going on if like you roll these things up. So I thought that was an interesting model. But looking ahead, yeah, I mean, I think of the big stories that will probably happen next year, it in my mind really revolves around new infrastructure. So that could be either in the deep in space around compute, storage, or bandwidth. All of these I think are the central commodities for like AI, and mechanisms to govern it. So like it might be the decentralized AI stuff, but we're starting to see more, I think, experimentation with hardware, which is nice. Like people making ordering competitors and those things, and I'm like, thank God, finally.
Right? Yeah, there, I just saw a decentralized ordering competitor.
Yeah, tons of that. Yeah, and that's the exciting part. Now you're seeing with like 3D printing and all of that, where it's like, how do you combine that stuff with crypto economics, right? And
why should people care about DeepIn?
Well, I think we're
like, can you explain to the audience what DeepIn is? Some people.
Yeah, so basically, what you sort of find in crypto is like these things that we make in one cycle only really become popular like many years later. NFTs is one example, right? 2017, and then kind of leads in 2021. So way back, actually, this was probably 2017, 2018. Some of the most hype crypto projects were these things at the intersection of hardware and crypto, right? So like IODEX, IOTA, Golem, like all these things that were trying to do what we can do now, but way before anyone even knew like kind of how you would combine open source and all these things with DIY hardware, which was very hard in 2016. Now all of that has shifted, right? Where it's like we have the supply chains, we have like very cheap hardware, people can like do the stuff at home, people have like self-installed solar panels and routers and all those things. And so you're using a very cheap physical infra, DeepIn, so decentralized physical infrastructure, and adding a crypto component to that. So in the last cycle, we had something like StepIt, right? If you guys remember that.
Yeah.
So like walk to earn. And everyone laughed at that. Correct. So it's like we had like all these to earn things. Everyone was like, oh, that's fake. That's like a ZERP phenomenon. But now it's like, oh, actually helium works, right? And like everyone laughed at helium for the longest time. I mean, they've been around for like a decade now. But like you look at like the outgrowth of that thing in Miami and like around the United States and how excited people are. And yeah, we're not in helium, but like you have to give credit to where it's due, right? Just like the fact that they are competing in cellular offload against like probably the most iconic American companies of all time and succeeding, right? If that's not inspirational for people, I don't know what is, right? So we're sort of looking at like what are the things I think that will galvanize the next set of retail people. Like crypto has become a major force in America, but what's the thing to like drive the next billion people to the space?
Is it the case that because Americans are just getting, especially at the lower end of the scale, their purchasing power is going lower and lower? With these things in crypto, they get to extend their purchasing power by getting paid back for what they're already doing.
Right. The future of work is that everyone's a capital allocator.
Right.
And so if you believe that and the marginal value of labor goes to zero, everyone needs to be like allocating capital in whichever way they can. Capital can be, human capital. It can be social capital. It can be whatever, but they need to figure out what they're best at or create this manifold of possibility and then just like double down on it, right? So if you can get capital through hardware, through what you think, all of those things, in a world of, until we hit post abundance, it's like that is probably this is probably the period of time that like people should think about that, right? We have no idea what a world like post abundance looks like, but I guess the only way to hedge against whatever kind of calamity or not happens is like making sure that you understand capital allocation.
Yeah,
how do you guys think about that? I guess, you're also in the business of allocating capital, right? So it's like, I don't know if you guys have given much thought.
It's an interesting question, right? Like, for us, capital is quite like literally capital, and our job is to
What's also
uh,
social capital, right? I mean,
yeah,
you guys do a lot in private wealth and
yep.
all that stuff. So connecting people together. I mean, is that a skill that will probably go away? Probably not, right?
No, I think it's getting even more prescient with people getting more lonely and removed from each other with technology. Ironically, so I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I think bringing people together in a physical way or in a meaningful way, rather, which could also be non-physical, online, is always going to be around, and will get even more of a hot commodity as people get more and more divided and removed from each other. In terms of a company, I think our job is to, at the moment on lending specifically, is to allocate capital efficiently to our customers, safely, efficiently, fully regulated manner. Um, that evolves with other products that we launch into now how do we allocate our own human capital that we have to like build and decide what to build. How do we allocate BD capital? How do we allocate um, marketing capital?
Yeah,
Like,
even growing a team is
yeah,
one of the hardest things to do in crypto, right? But that just goes to show how important this idea is of like how much money do you budget as a fledgling entrepreneur for BD versus engineering?
hmm
And these are like very important questions, right? Because crypto is so much about the memes, the BD, like getting your name out there that like you have a finite pool of capital, right?
hmm
And that's why so many companies die. Most companies die of suicide, not murder.
I think time is the most interesting form of capital that we think about a lot. Like, what we always come up against is like time or lack of it in doing what we need to do and what we want to do. So, I mean, AI tools are a great example of like what helps us make our time capital more efficient. I can write marketing copy in an hour, which I would take me like a day to write before. Um, Small example, stupid one, but like there's so many more examples of this. Right?
100%. Yeah, we're still in the early innings of like what does commoditized intelligence in business mean, right? Like you can think about it like, there are like very hard problems to think about. Like all problems, of course, are not made the same, right? But you as a leader want to only spend your time on like the big ones.
Mhm.
Like what are the big things that are going to move this business? But then it's like, I talk to so many people in the space where it's like half their day is like writing copy. It's like
Yeah.
this, it's Telegram, it's all these things. But can you imagine what that world looks like when it's AI agent based or just something? And it's like everyone has that, right? Because for those messages, commoditize intelligence. But then for important ideas, problems, being with great people, it's like you got to use your entire brain. Your entire brain needs to be there. You need to be fully in the moment. You can't be thinking about like I have like 50 messages on
We're at a
Telegram.
point right now where like the tools that we have like promised to get us there, but they're not quite there yet. So we
Yeah.
actually spend more time figuring out how to use the tools the right way and do more context switching than we even need to. So we're actually less efficient because the tools that are meant to make us more efficient.
Yeah. It is a learning curve, right? So it's
Yeah.
like typically it's, you don't want to be that person who's like, when it's too late, you're just like figuring out what to do, right? I always think about Google and how Google had to like sell itself in all these countries, especially to older people. And some people were just like, I'm never going to learn how to use a search engine, right? And that's like probably the wrong way to, that's of course the wrong way to do it. But like, yeah, to your point, there is like a right time, I think, to ape in and like test something out. And it's slow. Like, I think we're just at the beginning of that 2 years ago.
Mhm.
It's like 2 years ago, I was like, I personally don't really find GPT-3 or 4 like necessarily that compelling. But in the past few months, I've been like, oh, okay, like Claude, these things are like getting there now, where it's like, okay, like you can actually like maybe bring this to different avenues of the business and like
Yep.
get like a mini intern.
Yeah, I agree. I think like going forward, it depends on how long it takes for tooling to sort of catch up. But you'll see billion-dollar plus companies with teams in the single digits or
Mhm.
Yeah.
very small number of people.
Next question for
being-
us, right? What does like venture capital look like in that?
Like when do we
That's
see
why-
the first single person billion-dollar company? I think
Yeah.
it's coming.
Well, I would point people to like, there's a good book. It's called Japan and the Shackles of the Past, which is like basically everything that socially happens in America has happened in Japan 20 years earlier. And that sort of applies to China in some regard. But like one of the things that happened there is that like, I think it was a few years ago, but like there was a Chinese live streamer who made like, I think $1 billion in GMV selling lipstick.
Mhm.
on a live stream, and it's like, isn't she a company, right? Like she's representing herself, and then you bring someone like that. Imagine like a Jake Paul or like Logan Paul or something like that, right? And they're selling Prime with KSI, and they have clones of themselves basically, and they're all just like psyoping kids into buying Prime. Why not, right? Like there could be both of them, and they're just, it's their likeness being spread around. Why would they want to hire marketing people that are like worse than them at the job, right?
Yeah.
So I think the underrated part of all AI stuff is that it is multiplying excellence in a way that, like, if you're not the best at what you do, you just automatically lose.
Right.
Like, how are you competing against 100 Jake Pauls in marketing or YouTube?
Yeah.
And so that is why I think, back to the Mark Andreessen thing, where it's like, if we just had a set number of closed AI companies, we would all be shut out of what's going to be the biggest post-abundance phenomenon of all time, right? But if it's open source and like people can buy into whatever, right? It could be something as crazy as like BitTensor or, any of these other open source networks, and you have a stake, maybe that's better than UBI, right? Maybe it's like you want to be, like I said, a capital allocator and not a recipient of capital and like subjugated by, it's like, I think you deserve $2,000 a month instead of like, I actually remember, so when the Dutch East India Company came out, they were unique at the time because they allowed even housekeepers to buy in. And even years after the
it's
IPO,
one of the first public stock companies, right?
The first.
Yeah.
And even I remember there was a kind of unknown housekeeper at the time who like grew to exceptional prominence, but she had overheard some people talking about the IPO, and she puts in like 100 guilders, which is at the time of IPO, it was like 0.001%. So like minuscule, right? That grew in her lifetime to like in today's dollars like 200 mil. And so it's like, without knowing these things of history, right? It's like we're always susceptible to recreate the same mistake. But then you think about that, a random shopkeeper, right? And that's because Amsterdam wanted people to buy in and to make them feel included, so they wouldn't obviously have an uprising. We should do the same.
Yeah.
So instead of UBI, we should have a universal investment account.
I agree. A sovereign wealth fund, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's like, in pensions and those things, it's like, are we doing right by people? Like, probably not, right? Like, they missed out on the greatest wealth creation event of all time, the like Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Like, they're buying in now after it's still, obviously very bullish, but like they wanted to buy earlier, but we didn't let them.
Well, some did, but not American ones.
Yeah.
All right, Ani. As we get towards the end of this, we have this thing that we do where we do 5 rapid fire questions. So we're going to ask you simple questions, 1 line or 1 word answers. All right?
Yeah, I can start. Who's your favorite voice in crypto?
Oh, that's a tough one. I really like Tarun from Robot.
Yeah.
Very iconic thinker.
What's your favorite contrarian opinion? It doesn't have to be in crypto.
Yeah, without phrasing how I usually phrase it, I think people should start working earlier. Like, people shouldn't wait until they're in their early 20s to start working. I think you can add a lot of value even as a young person just being in the mix. And that was true of me, especially. And like, I just see people start too late. It's like you want compound interest very early on. So hopefully young people that listen to this, it's like, start immediately. Don't wait. Like, you don't know what you want to do, but just start.
You won't know until you like try doing things. Right?
Start in high school, start in middle school, right? Do stuff, be out there, right?
Yeah, I agree. What's the favorite financial company that you use?
Besides Arch?
Besides Arch.
Financial company.
Hey, we're the only one that actually gives you money, so.
Fair. Yeah. All the other ones are like taking it from you. Financial company in the sense of like investing apps.
Just financial products you use, whether it's an investing app.
I like, I think it's called Copilot. It like tracks spending and all of that's very beautifully designed. I met one of the designers there and I told him like, I don't know why the space is like complicated, but they managed to take something that is hard for other people to design and like make it very simple so that you just like know what's going on.
There's like literally only 2 big companies that do it right now.
So
like,
crazy.
One
it's
of
like,
our teammates, Tim, obviously, is like a huge Copilot stan. He's been using it for years.
Yeah.
And has the
make something timeless. Make a great design is timeless, right? So props to them.
What's the most like this one might be a hard answer for you because you have a shit ton of books. What is the most influential book that you've ever read?
When We Cease to Understand the World. So it's Benjamin Labou. It talks about the kind of groundbreaking influence that happened post 1950 mathematics. I'm saying it in a very boring way, but it's like it's so well written in how we've unlocked things that can just like very easily destroy the world and we have no idea. But through the lens of like these very human people, mathematicians that were also just some of the crazy people of all time, right? It's like very easy to dehumanize them now because it's like Einstein, whatever. But then it's such a gripping tale despite it all being real. Like, how do you know what you don't know?
Was Jim Simmons from that era of mathematics?
Yeah. So like many of the people that reshape finance, physics, another book I put in this light, Physics of Finance, also just talks about like, how do you, and you know, one of the things I'd love to solve in my lifetime is like, how do you make science applicable to normies? And like finance is always a good way of doing that, right? Because, you know, stocks, Brownian motion, obviously it's like randomness and stock prices and stuff. And now crypto is that weird mix of physics, technology, science, and investing. So I would highly recommend everyone should read that. Yeah, great book.
Awesome. And last question before we wrap. If you weren't in crypto VC, what industry would you be in?
Space. Yeah. Not building rockets, but like something to help in the Mars mission.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Ani, it's been a
guys.
pleasure. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Thanks for being here, and we'll probably do another one at some point too.
Hell
It
yeah.
was fun.